Hello everybody, my name is Sushant and I teach paper 1 of Political Science and International Relations at Vajiram and Ravi. Now today I am going to discuss a very important topic of the paper 1 section A, that is political theory, where I will be discussing theory of democracy, that is, as you can see on the board, it is elitist theory of democracy. And elitist theory of democracy, which I will be covering in 3 broad themes, where first I will be discussing the basic assumption of elitist theory of democracy. Second, I will be discussing views of the prominent scholars of elitist theory of democracy. And in the last, I will take up criticism of the elitist theory of democracy. Okay, so this is elitist theory of democracy, what we are going to study today. Now, if we talk about democracy, okay. Now, democracy, if you know, at G20 summit also, Prime Minister has repeatedly emphasized that India is the mother of democracy, okay. And the roots of democracy will go back into the ancient period where we discuss Athens was the model of democracy, but in India we also discuss that how Lichvi, for example, had the model of democracy. So, democracy is, if we say, it's a combination of 2 words, demos and cracy. Demos means people and cracy means rule. In other words, democracy is a rule of the people, and that's what was immortalized in the words of Abraham Lincoln, the president of US, when he had said, democracy is the government of the people, by the people and for the people. So democracy is not only a form of government. Democracy is not only a way of arriving at collective decisions, but democracy is also a way of life. Okay. So democracy has to be incorporated in all the spheres of life, social, political, economic, etc. And the main features of democracy, if I had to point out few main features of democracy. The first is democracy is based on consent of the people, and India is the world's largest democracy, and this consent of the people is given in periodic elections where there is a free and equal competition among the free and fair competition among the political parties. So every 5 years in India this consent is renewed. Second, democracy is based on accountability of the rulers to the people. This is a very important aspect of democracy because, the very first word of our preamble, Indian Constitution, it begins "we the people." It means what Rousseau famously said, that in a democracy, people are sovereign. People are the ultimate holders of the power, and government has to be accountable to the people. So democracy is a form of government which ensures accountability of the rulers to the people. Third, democracy is based on equality of people. Now, and democracy is based on empowerment of the masses. Now, these 2 elements are very important. Equality of the people. We in India, we have universal adult franchise, where it is based on everybody above 18 years of age is entitled to vote, and here it is based on the ideas of one person, one vote, one value. And democracy is based on the capacity, it's based on the faith in the capacity of ordinary people, that how they are able to manage their collective affairs. So democracy is one of the core values of democracy is political equality of the people, and democracy is also empowerment of the masses. So, what Dr. Ambedkar famously remarked, that political democracy in India is incomplete without socio-economic democracy, or he said, socio-economic democracy are the tissues and fibers of democracy. So, what strengthens democracy is the political aspect as well as socio-economic aspect, and it ultimately contributes to empowerment of the people. So this is broadly the essence of democracy. Now, various theorists have examined how democracy operated in liberal democracy, and one of the important theorists of democracy is the elitist theory of democracy. And we can understand the elitist theory of democracy, as I say, by first examining the basic assumptions of elitist theory of democracy. Second, views of the scholars, where we'll be discussing views of prominent scholars like Pareto, Mosca, Michels, Mills, Schumpeter. And third, I'll be discussing criticism of the elitist theory of democracy. Main criticism is by pluralist as well as Macpherson. Okay. And now this elitist theory of democracy comes from the word elite. What does the term elite means? Now elite means, if you see, the most talented, the most powerful members of the society. They are best in their field. Those who show the highest ability in their field, they are often called as elites. For example, the best services, if you compete civil services, the best services is called as IS, IPS, IFS. You will be in the elite category. So the word elitist comes from the word elite. And if we trace the roots of the elitist theory of democracy, the word elitism in political theory, we can trace it to the ideas of Plato and Aristotle. They were elitist in their outlook. When Plato believed that ruling is an art and only the best specialized in the art of governance, they should rule. He called them philosopher king. And Aristotle also, when he defended the slavery, he also talked about the inequality, hierarchy among the people, where he said masters are superior in virtue and slaves are inferior. Okay, so this elitism we also find in ideas of J.S. Mill, when J.S. Mill was called as a reluctant democrat. Okay, nevertheless, now here elitist theory of democracy is derived from elitist theory of power, which emerged in sociological studies. And the main exponents were Pareto, Mosca and Michels in particular. If we talk about basic assumption of elitist theory of democracy, now elitist theory of democracy, it talks about there is a natural division of society into dominant and the dependent classes. And this natural division of society, the emphasis is on the word natural, that it is not unlike what Marxists had said, that the society is divided into dominant and dependent classes. That's what Marx had also said. And the basis of this class division of society was private property. Marx had said that this is an artificial division of society. But elitist theory of democracy, it believes that this division of society into dominant and dependent, where the elites are the dominant, they are few in number and they rule over the dependent, which are masses. This division is natural, it's not artificial. And this division, elites are characterized by their competence and aptitude. This is what it distinguishes them from the masses. So obviously, elitist theory of democracy talks about a natural hierarchy among people, that people are not equal. What we have discussed is the essence of democracy, but they say that there is a natural hierarchy, and this hierarchy is considered as quite natural and beneficial to society also. So they also say that this division of society is functional. Functional means based on functions. So elites, they assume the leadership role, and masses are incapable of taking the decision for themselves. They feel better when elites take the decision on their behalf. That is why it is said that masses and the elites compensate each other, where elites are the leaders, they are in leadership positions and masses follow it. So they compensate each other. And secondly, there is no exploitation or injustice involved in this relationship. Remember, when Marx talked about dominant and dependent classes, he says this dominant class, which controls the means of production, it exploits the dependent classes. And this is what we have seen in history, whether it was master-slave society, whether it was feudal society, whether it was capitalism. This is what is the reality. What Marx famously said, history of all hitherto existing society is a history of class struggle. This struggle between dominant and dependent, and this relationship is based on exploitation. The elitists differ. Elitists say it is not based on exploitation or injustice. Rather, it is functional. They compensate each other. They complement each other. And it is said that while Marxism said that this exploitation, this injustice can be removed by establishing a communist society which will be a classless and stateless society. But for elitists, this division is natural and it cannot be overcome. Natural means it's an order of nature. And this society will continue to be divided between dominant elites who are few, they exercise power, and dependent, which are masses, which are destined to follow the elites. So democracy is not what Abraham Lincoln said, government of the people, by the people and for the people. But here elitists will say it is rather a close group of people. Democracy is like an oligarchy where a few people, they rule. So democracy is a government of the elite, by the elites and for the elites. It is elites who comprehend what is public interest and they rule in their interest. So this is a basic assumption of elitist theory of democracy, which I said is derived from elitist theory of power. Now, coming to basic assumption I have discussed. Second, views of the scholars. Now, one of the prominent scholars was Pareto. He was an Italian sociologist, and Pareto, in his book, The Mind and Society, he gave the elitist theory of democracy where, Pareto was inspired by views of Machiavelli, and Pareto believed, one famous statement of Pareto was that history of mankind is graveyard of aristocracy. History of mankind is graveyard of aristocracy. Now, this statement simply implies that, if you look at the human history, it is nothing. But what is a constant factor is it has been ruled by aristocrats, the elites in the society. So that's what is the rule of history. History is of mankind is a graveyard of aristocracy. And here, Pareto believed that, the entire society is classified into elites and the masses. Now, these scholars, including Pareto, differed on what is the basis of this classification. And in view of, Pareto, elites are the people who show highest ability in their field, and he particularly emphasized on two qualities, where he says intelligence and second he talked about, first is intelligence and second he talked about was talent. So elites, the distinguishing feature of elites is intelligence and talent. And in society is divided into elites and non-elites. The masses simply do not have this capacity, and masses, they are fearful of taking decisions. They feel safe if the elites, the most superiors, take decisions on their behalf. So what is the basis of this division? He said it is courage, intelligence and talent. So people who are intelligence and talent, they qualify to be elites. First point. Second point. Now here we find that Pareto distinguished between two types of elites. He further divides elite into two classes. First is governing as well as non-governing elites. Now, governing elite, as the name itself suggests, it means elites who are in power. For example, if I say currently the NDA party in India, the NDA alliance in India, it's a governing elite, while it is challenged by the India bloc. They are non-governing elites. And Pareto said that there is circulation of elites. He talked about a very important term, circulation of elites. Now this circulation of elites, like if I say wind circulation in geography, it means one set of elites is replaced by the other set of elites. So for example, in 2024 election, we may see in many of the states also, or at the center also, we may see a new set of ruling elite coming into power, and that is between governing and the non-governing elite, or the same elite may continue in power. So basically what Pareto talked about was that this is circulation of elite takes place among the governing as well as non-governing elites first. Second, he further divided governing elites into lion and the foxes, and this circulation of elite also takes place among lion as well as foxes. Lion, and in this he was inspired by views of Machiavelli. Lion is known by their strength. So elites who are powerful, they are important for maintaining status quo, and fox is known for cunningness. So these elites who are cunning, they can adjust themselves to the changing circumstances. So basically Pareto talked about two types of circulation. First, circulation of elites among the governing and non-governing elite. Second, it is intra-circulation among the governing elites, where the circulation is between lion as well as foxes. This is Pareto's concept of elitist theory. Okay. And later on, the second scholar who gave was Mosca. The name of Mosca's book was Ruling Class. He was again an Italian sociologist. Now Mosca said, in fact, as compared to Michels and Pareto, we find Mosca is more democratic than even Pareto, because Mosca believed. Now this elite, he termed it as a ruling class. What is the basis of this elite, which he termed as ruling class, is the organizing skills of the elite. And Mosca believed that this elite can come from the upper strata of society as well as from the lower strata of society. It means elites are those people who are distinguished by their organizing capacity, and every level of society, the higher class, the lower class, has the best organizer, and it is what it makes them elite. And this he talked about in context of democracy. For example, if I tell you lower strata, now Dr. Ambedkar was the foremost leader of the depressed classes in the pre-independence period, and many important Dalit leaders, for example, ex-UP Chief Minister Mayawati, she will be considered as an elite coming from the lower strata because she has great organizing skills. So an upper strata is obviously people coming from the privileged sections of society. So Mosca believed that yes, this elite is distinguished by the organizing skill, and Mosca also believed in circulation of elite. This time he believed that this circulation of elite takes place among the upper strata and the lower strata. By implication, it means that the lower strata of society has also a chance of entering into the rank of elites. But ultimately, it is the elites who control the power. They form the ruling class. They are the most powerful, most resourceful people of society, and the rest of the masses have to follow what the elites have for them. Now, Robert Michels, he gave the famous iron law of oligarchy. Now, what is oligarchy? Oligarchy means rule of few. And what is iron law? It means it is a fixed law. It does not change. It is universal. So Michels said, he believed that majority of people are slavish, they are lazy, and they are destined to be ruled by a few elites. And what is, the distinguishing feature of the elites as per Michels, he talks about is the manipulative skills of the elites. Now, Mosca says any organization, in fact, he had in mind the socialist countries where the Communist Party ruled. So he said whether it is a liberal democracy or whether it is a socialist country, we find that in any of these societies, any organization starts with a democratic aim, but eventually it is reduced to a control of the few elites. And these elites, what distinguishes them is they have the manipulative skills. By their oratory, rhetoric, persuasion, they make themselves indispensable, and that's how any organization is eventually reduced to the rule of the few people. That's why he called as oligarchy, and this is universal. It is without change when we see across all the societies. That is why he termed it as iron law of oligarchy, iron law, which does not changes, which is universal. So whether it is a socialist country or whether it is a capitalist country, we find ultimately the power rests in the hand of the few elites, and rest of the masses are simply incapable of assuming the leadership position. So basically we find that Mosca and Michels, they talk about elites, and if you compare Pareto, Mosca, both talked about circulation of elites, but Michels, he was categorical in stating that there is no circulation of elites. There is no circulation of elites. So in fact, a very important point, that circulation of elites was accepted by Pareto and Mosca, but it was rejected by Michels. He said, no, there is no circulation of elites. It will be always a few people who make themselves indispensable, and they will be controlling the society. Now, C. Wright Mills is another scholar. He studied American society, and when he studied American society, he came to conclusion that in America, democracy is not what Abraham Lincoln had said, that power does not vest in the hand of the people. Power vests among the small oligarchy, and which he termed as the power elite. And this power elite, it includes three categories of people: corporate leaders, military leaders, and prominent politicians. And these people collectively, they do not fulfill any demand. They themselves are capable of generating that demand. In fact, in the concept of power elite, what we will say, it's like a unified elite. Now, unified elite, that there is cohesion among these three sections of the people. Cohesion means unity, where largely they share the same social background and they help each other to maintain their collective dominance in society. So in America, the power is in the hands of a few selected people, which C. Wright Mills said it is a power elite. Okay. And this power elite is obviously consists of these three leaders. Military leaders, for example, you see the list of American presidents. Some of them have come directly from the military background, like Eisenhower. He was a general. And many American presidents have included the military generals as their Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense or very high position. So obviously they are part of the elites and prominent politicians, federal politicians in particular. So this is concept of power elite, and one of the most important contributions to this elite theory of democracy was made by a person called Joseph Schumpeter. And Schumpeter's book, Capitalism, Socialism and Democracy, that was the name of his book. And two main ideas he said. That he believed that his model of democracy is called as realistic model of democracy. What it means? Now, a realistic model of democracy is, the way democracy has been defined, that it's government of the people, by the people and for the people. He says it's not realized in principle. Actually, which version of democracy is realized is where there is a hierarchy among the people, where elites rule and masses choose the elites. So obviously this is a realistic model. This is model of democracy which is actually practicable. That's what he had given. And he had said that democracy is nothing, it's a rule of the politicians. So against Abraham Lincoln's idea, democracy is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Here, Joseph Schumpeter, he is very categorical in saying that democracy is nothing, it is rule of the politician. And what distinguishes democracy from authoritarianism, that this democracy allows people to choose among a set of elites. So no, he believed that people's role is confined only to choosing one set of elites over the other elites, and people, that is what their job is, and in reality the initiative always lies in the hand of the politicians. First point. Second, he talked about competitive elitism. Now, what is competitive elitism? That in democracy there is a multi-party system generally, and when there is a free competition among the politicians for getting people's support. So among the elites there is competition among themselves, and there is not unified set of elites. What he talked about was the fractured elite. The fractured elite, against what C. Wright Mills had said, that there is cohesion among the elites, unity among the elites. Here he says no, there is a competitive elitism and there is a fractured elite. It means in politics, different elites compete amongst each other to get people's support, and it's like a democracy is like a marketplace. Now, marketplace is basically, in a marketplace where the different companies, they compete amongst each other to get people's preference. That's how they'll be able to sell their product, and they will be able to earn the profit. And how people are attracted. For example, different telecom companies, they try to attract people's attention by saying that we are offering the fastest 5G speed, and if you choose us, wherever you go, our network will follow you. It means we are giving you best connectivity, we are giving you best internet speed, and that's how you can rely on the quality of our services. So any company, for example Airtel, Jio, or for that matter Vodafone, so they compete among themselves to attract people's attention and by giving attractive packages. In a similar way, democracy is like a marketplace where politicians compete among themselves for getting people's votes by devising the manifesto, by devising the policies and programs which attracts people, and whosoever is successful to attract the attention of the masses, that person will be elected as a leader. Now that's how the redeeming feature of democracy, which Schumpeter had said, that it makes the elite accountable to the electorate. They have to be sensitive to the needs of the electorate, but ultimately initiative remains in the hands of the leaders itself. And this fractured elite, if I had to show you through a diagram, if I say that's what we include in our material also. Okay, now if I had to show you Schumpeter's view, if I say by a pictographic representation. Okay, now if you see what is meant by Schumpeter is this diagram, and this diagram you can see is where this power elite model. Now this power elite model was given by C. Wright Mills. This power elite model was given by C. Wright Mills, where he talks about a single coherent elite. You can see elites and the masses, and these elites are single coherent elite. Whereas the competitive elite model talks about fractured elites, and that's how elites are fractured. And under scholar Anthony Downs, he developed it in terms of the economic theory of democracy. Now this economic theory of democracy, where politicians are like entrepreneurs, just like where they compete for people's vote, like what is in the marketplace. For example, a startup tries to sell its product by making it attractive. In a similar way, if any politicians set up its own political party, it will be similar to a startup. And whether the startup will be successful or not, it depends on how they're able to capture the imagination of masses by their attractive policies. So in that way, this economic model of democracy given by Anthony Downs, he says that how Individual voters behave like consumers, voting for the party with policies that are most closely reflect their own preferences. So in a way, that is how elitist theory of democracy talks about, and this market model of democracy is what Schumpeter's idea is called, and it is a realistic model of democracy. So basically, we have discussed the views of the elitist scholars, where I focused on views of Pareto, Mosca, Michels, C. Wright Mills, as well as a very important scholar, Joseph Schumpeter. This elitist theory of democracy is also called as the empirical theory of democracy, because that's what they said, that when we see actual operation of democracy, that's what we see. Empirical comes from the word empiricism, which means any knowledge which is based on observation or sense experience. So elitist theory of democracy is called as empirical theory of democracy, because this is what we observe, that democracy in reality is not a government of the people, it's a government of the elites, and role of the masses is to just choose the elite. So I've discussed the basic assumption, I've discussed the views of the scholars. Okay. Moving on to criticism, and this criticism is of the pluralist as well as it is given by Macpherson. Okay. Now if we talk about views of Macpherson and pluralist, now pluralist is Robert Dahl. Now pluralist comes from the word plural, and pluralist, especially if I talk about the group politics. Now Robert Dahl wanted to examine views of C. Wright Mills, that whether the concept of power elite given by C. Wright Mills is what we see in US politics. He conducted a study in New Havens, a place in US, and the title was Who Governs, where Robert Dahl in fact came to conclusion that in reality democracy is not the government of the people, as classical theory says. It's not a government of the few, that is oligarchy, as elitist theory says, but in fact it is government of the people acting in groups. That's why the term which he gave was polyarchy. So polyarchy, it says people in groups. People in groups, they influence the public policy making. The power is not concentrated in the hands of few. That's what elitist theory says, in the hands of elite, or what the Marxist theory say, in the hands of the economically dominant class. Rather, power is widely dispersed among variety of groups. The name pluralist talks about plurality of the groups in society, and any public policy is a result of equal competition, bargaining among these different groups. So it is not government of the people, it is not government of the elites, but it is government which is a neutral arbiter, and power is distributed among these different groups who have equal competition for changing the government's policies. Later on, he modified his idea to deformed polyarchy, that it is not polyarchy, rather it is deformed polyarchy. And deformed polyarchy means what, similar to almost Marxist theory, that it is a economically powerful group, like example corporate group, which have an edge as compared to the other groups. So it means it is deformed. Now deformed means if you have ever played with a plastic ball. So if it is deformed on one side, the ball will always tilt on that side. In a similar way, deformed polyarchy means that obviously there is a competition among the groups for shaping public policy, but which group has its upper hand, which group has its most important influence? It is the corporate groups, because of the huge resources they command. And that's why they were critical of the elitist theory of democracy. But a more important criticism from normative angle is by C.B. Macpherson. In his famous book, Democratic Theories, Essays in Retrieval, 1973. Now, C.B. Macpherson said, he examined both the elitist and the pluralist theory of democracy. He says these are empirical theory of democracy, whereas elitist theory says it is rule of the elites, and pluralist theory given by Robert Dahl is called as the rule of the power is widely distributed it is dispersed among the various groups. He calls both this empirical theory of democracy and he uses the word Schumpeter-Dahl axis. And he says this Schumpeter-Dahl axis, by focusing on the procedural aspect of democracy, they say it has reduced democracy from being a normative to that of a procedural aspect only. That if certain qualities are there in democracy, like free market competition, like protection of rights, that regime is said to be democratic, whether it is rule of the people, whether it is rule of the elites, whether it is rule of the groups. In reality, he went a step ahead and believes that you have to focus on normative dimension of the democracy, where democracy shall not be reduced to that of a procedure only. Rather, democracy has a broader term, empowerment of the masses. And he says this elitist pluralist theory, they are market model or they maintain equilibrium in society. What is equilibrium? Status quo. Like status quo in society. Whereas democracy has no humanist aspirations in their ideas, and what he believed was empowerment of the masses. And here C.B. Macpherson says a democracy is that democracy which enhances the developmental power of the individual. This developmental power of the people is what is meant by empowerment of the masses. That developmental power is like what J.S. Mill said, that democracy through its participation enhances the qualities of the people. It develops their capacities for taking decision. It also cultivates in them the concern, that is public spiritedness, where it curbs their selfish interest. So by participation, people develop the desirable qualities amongst themselves. So democracy should enhance the developmental power of all people and not only of the elites, not only of the propertied classes, which is basically what elitist theory says and Marxist theory say. So basically, democracy has to be based on equality of the people. Democracy has to be based on faith in the capacity of ordinary masses. And elitist theory clearly validates that ideal. Okay. So on these two main grounds, the pluralists criticize the elitist theory of democracy and the Macpherson criticizes elitist theory of democracy. And democracy is a very important topic for the examination. If you see the previous year's question, if I take up the question of Mains 2022, and you can see on the board, in Mains 2022, UPSC asked the question. This is a paper of Mains Civil Services Examination Mains 2022, where the question number 2C, as you can see on the board, this was asked by UPSC in the examination, where it talks about elitist theory of democracy denies the possibility of democracy as rule of the people, elucidate. This was question 2C, which was asked in Mains 2022. So elucidate, you have to start with the way I taught, basic assumptions, what are the views of the scholars, and in conclusion you may include the criticism part also. So that is the elitist theory of democracy, a very important theory of democracy. And rest of the theories of democracy I'll be covering in our regular classes. So I hope this was helpful to you, and thank you very much.